My friend put dog food in my mince as a joke. I spent 1 week in hospital with a life-threatening illness. Reddit, have you ever had a friend pull a prank so out of bounds that it nearly cost you your life? That's exactly what happened to me, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how someone I trusted could be so damn reckless. I 28M, and I am finally out of the hospital after one of the scariest and most frustrating weeks of my life. It all started with what my so-called friend, Callum 27M, thought was a harmless prank. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. While we were cooking together, he swapped out the beef mince I had bought for my spaghetti bolognese with canned dog food. He thought it was hilarious. The joke didn't hit the way he thought it would because, days later, I ended up in the hospital with a life-threatening bacterial infection. The doctors told me if I had waited even a day longer to come in, the infection could have spread and caused organ failure. Or worse. Callum, he's brushed the whole thing off like it's no big deal. Cooking is my thing. I love hosting dinners for friends and trying out new recipes. Last week, I invited a small group over for one of my favorite dishes, spaghetti bolognese. I was excited to share the meal I'd been planning all day. Callum, who I've known for years, offered to help in the kitchen. In hindsight, that was my first mistake. While I was chopping veggies, Callum volunteered to handle the mince. I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? I assumed he was just being helpful. What I didn't realize at the time was that he had swapped out the high-quality beef mince I'd bought for a cheap can of dog food he had hidden in his bag. He mixed it into the sauce while I was distracted. The food smelled fine, looked fine, and because the sauce had strong flavors, garlic, onions, tomato paste, I didn't notice anything off. At dinner, everyone complimented the meal. Callum was grinning like an idiot the whole time, which I chalked up to him being in a good mood. Looking back, it was probably because he was sitting on this hilarious secret. It's weird looking back. At the time, I didn't even notice how off Callum was acting. The fact that he barely touched his plate should have tipped me off, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. The next morning, I woke up feeling nauseous. My stomach hurt, and I was running to the bathroom every hour. I figured it was just a bad case of food poisoning, annoying but manageable. I tried to push through it, but by the end of the day I couldn't keep anything down. Water? Nope. Crackers? Forget it. By the second day, things got much worse. I was burning up with a fever, shivering uncontrollably, and so weak I could barely get out of bed. My roommate took one look at me and said, "You need to go to the hospital, now." When I got to the ER, they ran a bunch of tests and immediately hooked me up to an IV because I was severely dehydrated. The doctors suspected a bacterial infection, but they needed to confirm it with stool and blood samples. They told me not to panic, but they'd seen cases like this turn serious fast if not treated. A day later, the test results came back. I had salmonellosis, a bacterial infection often linked to contaminated food. The doctors explained that pet food, especially cheaper brands, isn't held to the same safety standards as human food and is a common source of salmonella. The bacteria had made its way into my system, and because I'd waited so long to seek help, it had started spreading aggressively. The doctor laid it out. If I'd waited another day or two, the salmonella could have entered my bloodstream and caused sepsis. At that point, it wouldn't just be an infection, it would be life-threatening. I was admitted to the hospital and spent the next 7 days on antibiotics, painkillers, and IV fluids while the medical team monitored my recovery. While I was stuck in a hospital bed, I texted the group chat to let everyone know what was going on. I mentioned the salmonella diagnosis, and that's when Callum decided to come clean. He replied, "Wait, could this have been from the dog food? Ha ha ha, don't hate me, but I swapped your mince with some canned stuff as a joke. Didn't think it would actually make you sick." When Callum casually admitted he'd swapped the mince for dog food, my stomach churned. Not from the bacteria, but from sheer disbelief. My hands trembled as I reread the text over and over, my brain struggling to reconcile the carefree tone of his message with the severity of what he'd done. I was too sick, too furious, and too shocked to process it. Callum thought he was being funny, but he had no idea, or didn't care, how dangerous his joke was. When I finally had enough strength to respond, I told him exactly what the doctors said about the infection and how close I came to something far worse. His response? "Relax, you're fine now. Stop being so dramatic." Dramatic? He nearly killed me, and I was the dramatic one? The scariest part of all this is how close I came to something much worse. The doctor said if I'd ignored the symptoms or waited any longer, the infection could have caused organ damage or even been fatal. That's a hard thing to wrap your head around. The fact that someone I considered a close friend thought this was a good idea and then had the audacity to brush it off has shaken me to my core. I can't look at Callum the same way, and honestly, I don't think I can ever trust him again. I'll be posting updates as I figure out what to do next, but for now, I'm just focusing on recovering and trying to make sense of how something like this could even happen. Thanks for reading, Reddit, and for any advice you have. I need all the help I can get. Update 1. Hey Reddit, I'm back with an update, and things have escalated in ways I didn't expect. First off, thank you for all the support on my original post. Reading through your comments gave me the push I needed to confront Callum, even though I was still feeling physically weak from everything I'd been through. Here's what happened when I finally spoke to him. After I was discharged, I took a day to rest at home and gather my thoughts. I couldn't shake the anger and betrayal I felt. A part of me wanted to believe that maybe Callum didn't realize how dangerous his actions were, but the more I replayed his "it's just a joke" response in my mind, the more I realized he just didn't care. He thought this whole thing was funny. I decided to meet him in person to lay everything out. I texted him and said I needed to talk. He responded casually, like nothing had happened, and agreed to meet at a local cafe. I was still weak, and even walking to the cafe felt like running a marathon, but I needed to say my piece. When I got there, Callum greeted me with this smug grin, like we were about to catch up over coffee and laugh about the whole thing. The moment I sat down, I went straight to the point. I told him about the hospital stay, the diagnosis, and how the doctors said I was lucky I didn't wait longer to get treated. His reaction? He laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not an apologetic laugh. An actual chuckle, like I was telling him a funny story. He said something like, "You're fine now though, right? So no harm done." At that point, my patience snapped. I told him this wasn't just about me getting better. It was about the fact that he put my health and life at risk for a joke. A joke. He brushed it off, saying he never meant for things to get serious, that he didn't think a little dog food could cause such a big problem. I tried to explain to him why what he did was so reckless. The dog food he used wasn't even from a reputable brand. It was one of those sketchy, cheap ones with questionable safety standards. He interrupted me halfway through saying, "Man, it's not like I fed you poison. It's just pet food. People eat worse stuff on dares." That was it for me. I realized there was no getting through to him. He wasn't going to apologize, and he wasn't going to take responsibility. In his mind, he had done nothing wrong because in the end, I survived. I told him I couldn't believe someone I considered a friend could be so careless, and I walked out. I blocked his number right after that. Word about what happened spread quickly among our mutual friends. I didn't intend to make it a big deal. I only told a couple of close people because I needed support. But you know how these things go. Everyone had an opinion, and it didn't take long for people to start taking sides. Most of our friends were horrified when they found out what Callum had done. They couldn't believe he'd not only swapped the mints, but that he thought it was funny to admit it while I was in the hospital. A lot of them reached out to check on me, which I really appreciated, but there were also a few who downplayed the situation. One person said, "Callum just has a weird sense of humor. You know he doesn't think things through." Another said, "It was a prank gone wrong, but he didn't mean any harm. You're okay now, so maybe just let it go." I was stunned. How could anyone defend what he did? This wasn't a harmless prank, it was reckless and dangerous. If the infection had progressed to sepsis, I might not even be here to tell this story. The physical recovery has been slow, but steady. I still feel weaker than usual, and my appetite isn't back to normal yet. The doctors told me it could take weeks for my body to fully recover, and I'll need follow-up appointments to make sure there's no long-term damage. Emotionally, though, that's a whole different story. I'm angry, hurt, and honestly questioning everything about my friendship with Callum. This isn't just about the dog food anymore. It's about the fact that someone I trusted didn't care about my safety. And the worst part? He's not even sorry. I've been rethinking a lot of my relationships lately. If there are people in my life who can brush something like this off as just a joke, do I really want them around? I've started distancing myself from anyone who's made excuses for Callum. I don't have the energy to explain to people why this wasn't funny or harmless. It's exhausting. I've started documenting everything. The text messages from Callum, the hospital records, and even screenshots of conversations with mutual friends who know what happened. I'm considering taking legal action, but I'm still weighing my options. The medical bills from my hospital stay are piling up, and I don't think it's fair that I have to shoulder those costs because of Callum's stupidity. For now, I'm focusing on my recovery and trying to process everything. This whole experience has been a wake-up call about the kind of people I let into my life. I'll keep you updated as I figure out my next steps. Thanks again for all the advice and support, Reddit. You've helped me feel less alone in this, and I really appreciate it. Update 2. Hey Reddit, I'm back again, and things have taken some surprising and frustrating turns. After confronting Callum and cutting him out of my life, I thought I could start focusing on recovery and moving forward. But of course, things rarely stay that simple. The fallout from this whole mess has spread further than I anticipated, and I'm realizing just how deep the cracks in my social circle run. As I mentioned before, news of what happened between Callum and me spread quickly among our mutual friends. At first, most people seemed horrified by his actions. A lot of them reached out to check on me, offering their support and letting me vent about how reckless and thoughtless his prank was. For a while, it felt like people understood the gravity of the situation. But then came the Callum defenders. A small but vocal group of friends started downplaying what happened. Their favorite line seemed to be, "It was just a prank that went too far." They'd say things like, "You know Callum doesn't think before he acts," or "He probably didn't realize how serious it could get." One even had the audacity to suggest, "Maybe you're blowing this out of proportion. It's not like he poisoned you on purpose." That one hit hard. Blowing it out of proportion? I spent a week in the hospital hooked up to IVs because of his joke. The doctors told me I could have developed sepsis if I'd waited longer to seek treatment. How is that something to shrug off as just a prank? I tried explaining the seriousness of what happened to a few of these people, but it felt like talking to a wall. They'd nod along but then circle back to excuses for Callum's behavior. Eventually, I stopped trying. If someone can look at what happened and still side with Callum, I don't think there's someone I want in my life. Cutting off Callum was easier than I expected. It's clear he doesn't care about anyone but himself. But distancing myself from people I thought were my friends, that's been much harder. I've started to realize just how much I overlooked in some of my friendships. For example, one friend I've known for years told me, "Callum just has a messed up sense of humor. He didn't mean it." I couldn't believe they were willing to brush off something so dangerous just because Callum has always been like that. It made me question how much I've let slide in the past. This whole experience has left me feeling isolated. The friends who truly support me have been amazing, but the ones who've defended Callum or stayed neutral have made me question everything. How many of them would have stood by me if things had gone even worse? If I'd ended up in the ICU or, God forbid, something worse happened? I've started therapy to help process everything. My therapist has been great about helping me unpack the anger, betrayal, and anxiety I've been carrying since this all started. But there's still this lingering sense of distrust I can't seem to shake. On top of the emotional toll, the financial burden of this whole ordeal has been a nightmare. My insurance covered a chunk of the hospital costs, but I'm still staring down several $1,000s in out-of-pocket expenses. Between the ER visit, the hospital stay, and follow-up appointments, the bills just keep piling up. And the worst part? Every time I look at them, I get angrier. Why should I have to pay for Callum's stupidity? He's the one who thought it would be funny to feed me dog food. He's the reason I ended up in the hospital. Yet here I am, stressing over how to cover the costs while he goes about his life without a care in the world. That's when I started seriously considering legal action. A lot of you suggested filing a police report or taking Callum to court, and after some research and advice, I realized you're right. I shouldn't have to bear the financial and emotional burden of this alone. His prank wasn't just a bad joke, it was reckless and dangerous. If the roles were reversed, I'm sure he wouldn't think twice about holding me accountable. I spoke with a lawyer this week to see what my options are. They explained that what Callum did could fall under food tampering, which is taken very seriously, especially when it results in harm. They also mentioned reckless endangerment as a potential charge. The lawyer recommended filing a police report as a first step, so that's exactly what I did. Filing the report was nerve-wracking. I worried that I'd come across as overly dramatic or petty, but the officer who took my statement was incredibly understanding. They said food tampering is no joke, and that my hospital records made it clear this was a serious incident. Knowing they're taking it seriously has been a huge relief. Of course, Callum found out about the police report almost immediately. He called me. Yes, somehow he managed to get through even though I'd blocked his number. The voicemail he left was nothing short of infuriating. He accused me of ruining his life over a harmless prank and said I was blowing things out of proportion. Hearing that just solidified my decision to move forward with legal action. Callum still doesn't understand, or doesn't care, that his actions could have killed me. He's only worried about how this is going to affect him, and honestly, that's his problem now. The lawyer is helping me prepare a civil case to recover my medical expenses, and the police are investigating the food tampering report. I know this isn't going to be a quick process, but I'm determined to see it through. Callum needs to face the consequences of his actions, and I refuse to let him get away with brushing this off as a joke. In the meantime, I'm focusing on my recovery and rebuilding my social circle. The friends who've stuck by me have been an incredible support system, and I'm learning to let go of the people who've shown their true colors during all of this. I'll keep you all updated as the legal process unfolds. Thanks again for the advice, support, and validation. It's helped me stay grounded through this absolute mess. Update 3. Hey Reddit, I'm back with another update, and trust me, things have escalated. After spending a week in the hospital and filing a police report, the wheels are in motion, and the fallout from Callum's reckless prank is finally catching up with him. Here's what's been happening. After filing the report, I expected things to move slowly. It's bureaucracy, after all. But to my surprise, the police have been quick to act. They contacted me within a few days to let me know that they were taking the case seriously, especially given the potential for food tampering to cause widespread harm. They reviewed the hospital documents I provided, including the doctor's notes explicitly stating that my salmonellosis was linked to contaminated dog food. I also handed over screenshots of Callum's texts where he admitted to swapping the mince and dismissed it as just a joke. The police assured me that these messages were crucial evidence of intent. The kicker? When the police reached out to Callum to inform him of the investigation, he was completely blindsided. From what I've been told, he downplayed the whole thing and even tried to argue that it was a harmless prank that got blown out of proportion. But as the officers pointed out, harmless pranks don't send people to the hospital for a week. Not long after the police contacted him, Callum started trying to fix things. On his terms, of course. First, he called me using an unknown number, ranting about how I was ruining his life over something he claimed wasn't a big deal. I didn't even bother engaging. I hung up and blocked the number. I guess you never really know how people will react until they're backed into a corner. His response showed me that he cared more about saving face than taking accountability. But he didn't stop there. He sent a message through a mutual friend saying he was willing to pay my hospital bills if I dropped the charges. It wasn't an apology, just an attempt to avoid consequences. To me, this only proved he still didn't grasp the gravity of what he'd done. I told the friend to pass along the message that I wasn't interested in any backdoor deals, and that this was now a matter for the courts to handle. This part was completely unexpected. I was meeting with my lawyer to finalize the details of my civil suit when Callum showed up uninvited. He barged into the office, ignoring the receptionist, and started ranting about how I was blowing things out of proportion. My lawyer quickly intervened, telling him this wasn't the time or place for his theatrics. But before he could be escorted out, Callum made a last-ditch effort to save himself. He blurted, "I'll pay for everything if you just drop this. You're fine now, aren't you?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even with a potential criminal charge hanging over his head, Callum's attitude hadn't changed. He still thought this was about money or petty revenge. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "This isn't about being fine. It's about holding you accountable for your actions." My lawyer promptly had him removed from the premises. As word of the legal proceedings spread, reactions in our friend group started to solidify. The majority of people sided with me, expressing shock and anger at what Callum had done. Several friends reached out to check on me and even offered to support me in court if I needed character witnesses. But not everyone was as understanding. A few mutual friends tried to downplay the situation with comments like, "Callum's just immature, he didn't mean any harm," or "It was a stupid joke, but suing him is too far." Hearing this was infuriating. It made me realize that some people in my life would rather excuse dangerous behavior than hold someone accountable. I've since cut ties with anyone who's defended Callum. This whole ordeal has shown me that I need friends who prioritize integrity and accountability over blind loyalty to someone who clearly doesn't deserve it. The civil suit is moving forward smoothly, thanks to the mountain of evidence against Callum. My lawyer has filed claims for the full cost of my medical bills, lost wages for the week I spent in the hospital, and damages for emotional distress. The bills alone are staggering, thousands of dollars that I shouldn't have to pay because of someone else's recklessness. Callum's lawyer, yes, he's hired one now, has reportedly advised him to settle out of court, but I haven't received any formal offers yet. At this point, I'm prepared to take this all the way if I have to. It's not just about the money, it's about making sure Callum understands that his actions had real, life-altering consequences. The criminal charges are still pending, but I've been informed that Callum will likely face a hefty fine and potentially some community service if convicted. Honestly, I'm more focused on the civil case. Getting my medical expenses covered is my top priority, especially since the bills are a constant reminder of how close I came to something much worse. On a personal level, I'm trying to rebuild my sense of normalcy. Hosting dinners and cooking for friends used to be my favorite way to unwind, but now I feel a lingering sense of paranoia whenever I step into the kitchen. I'm working on overcoming that, and therapy has been a big help. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. I've cut Callum out of my life completely, and I'm leaning on the friends who've shown real support throughout this ordeal. This experience has been a wake-up call about the importance of boundaries and accountability, and I'm determined to come out of it stronger. Thanks again to everyone who's been following this story and offering advice. Your comments and support have been invaluable, and I'll keep you updated as the legal proceedings unfold. Final update. Hey Reddit, it's been a roller coaster, but I'm relieved to say that everything has finally wrapped up. The legal process came to a head last week when Callum's criminal case was finally resolved. After multiple hearings and enough evidence to make his lawyer visibly uncomfortable, Callum pled guilty to the charge of reckless endangerment. The judge handed him a hefty fine and sentenced him to 100 hours of community service. From what I've heard, he's going to be spending a lot of time cleaning up parks and public spaces, which feels fitting considering the mess he created in my life. During the sentencing, Callum gave a half-assed apology, claiming he never meant to hurt anyone. But even then, it felt more like he was sorry about the consequences, rather than his actions. The judge didn't hold back, stating plainly that his prank was a dangerous act of negligence that could have cost a life. Hearing that validated everything I'd been feeling and made the whole ordeal worth pursuing. The civil case was a separate battle, but one that ended in my favor. Callum's lawyer reached out to negotiate a settlement before it went to court, likely because they knew they didn't have a leg to stand on. I agreed to settle under the condition that Callum pay for all my medical expenses, cover my lost wages, and add damages for the emotional distress this caused me. The total amount was significant, and from what I've heard, Callum had to dip into his savings to cover it. It wasn't about the money for me though. It was about ensuring he took responsibility for what he did. Knowing that he's now financially accountable for his actions feels like the closest thing to justice I could get. If there's one unexpected consequence of all this, it's how much my social circle has changed. After the news of Callum's sentencing and settlement spread, a few of the friends who tried to downplay the prank reached out to me. Some apologized, saying they hadn't realized the severity of what happened. Others doubled down, insisting it was all blown out of proportion. I didn't bother arguing with them. At this point, I'm done trying to justify my actions to people who weren't the ones lying in a hospital bed. I've distanced myself from anyone who can't see why this was serious. Life's too short to keep people around who can't recognize the importance of accountability. One of the hardest parts of this whole experience has been rebuilding my trust in people and in myself. Hosting dinners and cooking for friends used to be something I loved. But for weeks after I got out of the hospital, I couldn't even look at a kitchen without feeling a wave of anxiety. Therapy has been a lifeline here. My therapist helped me work through the fear and start reclaiming my space. It's slow progress, but I've started cooking again, albeit with a much smaller circle of people I trust implicitly. Last weekend, I hosted my first dinner since the incident. It was a small gathering, just two close friends who were incredibly supportive throughout all of this. We kept the menu simple, and while I'd be lying if I said I wasn't hyper-vigilant, it felt good to do something normal again. Baby steps, right? Callum's reputation has taken a massive hit, and frankly, I think he's only just beginning to understand the ripple effects of his actions. Word has spread beyond our immediate circle, and people who used to see him as the funny guy are now keeping their distance. I've heard through mutual acquaintances that he's struggling socially and financially. Part of me feels a little sorry for him. It's a lonely way to live. But then I remember the complete lack of remorse he showed until the consequences caught up with him. Actions have consequences, and unfortunately for him, he's learning that the hard way. This whole ordeal has been exhausting, but it's also been a wake-up call. Life is too short to waste on people who don't take accountability. I want to say thank you. Your advice, support, and even tough love helped me navigate what felt like an impossible situation. If there's one thing I hope people take away from this, it's that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even when it feels like the harder path. Accountability matters, and people should be held to the consequences of their actions. As for me, I'm focusing on moving forward. I'm planning a small trip to clear my head and celebrate the fact that I made it through this mess in one piece. And who knows, maybe I'll use it as a chance to try new recipes and rediscover the joy of cooking without any lingering doubts. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride, Reddit.